Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Training Tuesday offered by the Chief Procurement Office for General Services. We are so happy to have all of you with us here today. All right, so next we are going to go over our Training Tuesday agenda. We have our updates and reminder. We're going to go over communications, pre-submission conferences, and then we'll go over where to find some additional trainings and end things with our Tuesday takeaway. Great. So our updates and reminders for today, including today, we have 14 total days until the end of the fiscal year, and that includes weekends and holidays. However, with weekends and Juneteenth this Thursday, we only have 9 business days left this fiscal calendar year. Please make sure that you are communicating with your SPO about procurements that must be completed prior to the end of the fiscal year. And don't forget to check out our upcoming trainings and get yourselves registered. July 10th, we will be hosting the Procurement Methods Small Purchase course, and on July 17th, we will be hosting the Procurement Methods Invitation for Bid course. For that course, you do have to have a certificate for specifications prior to enrollment, and we can't wait to see you there. Okay, so now let's dive into the ever important topic of communications. All right, so CPO Notice 2024.10 provides guidance on how small purchases may be conducted. Agencies with designation may contact a single actively registered Illinois small business under $20,000 to contract for supplies or services. Those procurements over $20,000 must utilize bid buy and provide all small businesses the opportunity to respond to the agency's published needs. If the small purchase has emergency conditions, then the agency should conduct as much competition as possible, but may communicate with vendors prior to routing for approvals. If the small purchase has sole source conditions, the agency must contact the vendor to gain pricing and availability information prior to routing for approvals. If the agency is utilizing the emergency procurement method, the agency shall utilize as much competition as practicable under the circumstances, and agency shall use best efforts to include contractors certified under the Business Enterprise Program in the agency's emergency procurement process. This is per Section 20-30 of the Procurement Code. Agencies may communicate with a sole source vendor prior to routing for approvals. If you don't, you will potentially have inaccurate information on your sole source justification form as to the pricing or scope. That can't be corrected after the CPO's approval has been given. Therefore, it is necessary as a part of the sole source process to communicate with your vendor prior to the publication. For a competitive procurement, which would include IFBs and RFPs, we are not allowed to individually communicate with vendors prior to or during the procurement process. All communication for a competitive procurement must be completed by using bid buy so that it is part of the published record and procurement file. So when do communications need to be reported? When any written or oral communication received by a state employee who, by the nature of his or her duties, has the authority to participate personally and substantially in the decision to award a state contract, and that imparts or requests material information or makes a material argument regarding potential action concerning an active procurement matter, including but not limited to an application, a contract, or a project, shall be reported to the Procurement Policy Board. Section 50-39 of the Procurement Code defines material argument as a communication that a reasonable person would believe was made for the purpose of influencing a decision relating to a procurement matter. It also states that reports shall be entered within 30 days of communication and that communications regarding change orders or renewals must be reported. So what does not need to be reported? So there are some communications that don't require you to report, and those may include statements made in a public forum, statements regarding procedure and practice, statements made by a state employee to an agency head or other agency employees, EEC employees, other agency employees involved in the procurement, unsolicited communications providing general information, responses to solicitations, including requests for information, clarification regarding a solicitation so long as there is no competitive advantage to the person or business and the questions and answers are posted in BidBuy. All of that said, I will go on to say that it is always safest to over-report than under-report. If you've had a communication and you are unsure if it should be reported, you will need to contact your ethics officer. If you need help finding out who your ethics officer is, you can search for them on the EEC's website as linked on this screen. Please remember that whether or not it is a reportable communication to PPB, it is still a communication that must be included in the procurement file. Let's also discuss pre-submission conferences. Excuse me. Pre-submission conferences are utilized to convey or highlight information that a vendor needs to be aware of when responding to a solicitation. Per the rules 1.2005W, the conference shall be held long enough after the solicitation has been issued to allow potential vendors to become familiar with it and sufficiently before solicitation opening to allow consideration by vendors of pre-submission conference results in preparing their responses. Dependent on the solicitation, there may be times that it is necessary for a mandatory pre-submission conference to be held. However, this may lead to unnecessary restrictions. Non-mandatory allows all vendors to provide a response to the solicitation, regardless of a pre-submission conference attendance. If it is vital to the procurement to include a mandatory pre-submission conference, please assure that your solicitation is clear that any late arrivals or early departures will result in the vendor being deemed non-responsive. Per CPO Notice 2020.03, agencies are required to utilize our pre-submission conference sign-in. On the pre-submission conference sign-in sheet, you will need to enter solicitation-specific information on the first section of the page 1, which is being shown here on the left. All vendors must be accounted for at the pre-submission conference. This sign-in sheet must be completed regardless of if the conference is virtual or on-site. And this sign-in must be completed regardless if it was a mandatory or non-mandatory vendor attendance. So if you have elected to have a pre-submission conference, this completed sign-in must be included in your procurement file, whether it's mandatory or non-mandatory. What should be discussed at the conference? So the due date and time. Discourage vendors from waiting until the end or to the day of the opening to submit bids. Some files may take more time to upload based on vendor's system configuration or internet limitations, and the state is not responsible for their system configurations and will not accept late bids. So make sure to stress to vendors to get those in earlier rather than later. And then the overview of the solicitation. In addition to what we just covered, you may want to additionally discuss any specific details that the agency wants to emphasize that were published with the solicitation. BEP goal and details regarding the process. State that the solicitation stands as published unless an amendment is published in BidBuy. And show the vendor submission video. We have 2 vendor submission walkthrough videos. One is for responding to RFPs, and the other is responding to IFBs. Both can be found on the CPOGS website in the Procurement Resource Library within the Vendor Resources folder. Showing these videos is not a mandatory requirement, but we encourage you to at least provide the link for vendors to watch them on their own. And here are some things to remember. Please recall that pre-submission conference sign-in sheets are a requirement and must be included in the procurement file. If you hold a conference and the bid is canceled, you must still attach the pre-conference sign-in sheet for the procurement file. If you have a pre-submission conference and no vendors attend, you still need to have the pre-submission conference sign-in sheet attached to the procurement file. because it will still show the state staff that was available for the pre-submission conference and show a record of no attendance. Timing is very important as well. Do not hold a conference too close to the bid due date. This may not allow vendors adequate time to finalize their bid or proposal after the conference has concluded, especially if they are waiting for the state to publish the finalized questions and answers as a bid amendment. There shall not be any individualized conversations at a bid conference. This means that when you have vendors in person, you can't have side conversations with a single vendor. Additionally, there must be a set published date and time for vendors to attend. It is not allowable to host vendors on an individual or requested basis, as this may have the perception of bias even if it was not intentional. If you are needing to show conditions of a location, please consider sharing photos, diagrams, blueprints, or other attachments on BidBuy to allow vendors that are unable to attend a non-mandatory pre-submission conference to still obtain information that the agency notes as important. All right, and please make sure to visit the CPOGS Training Center for more training opportunities. We'd like to highlight our BidBuy trainings. We have our BidBuy System on-demand trainings, and those are available 24/7 on our CPOGS Training Center website. And the BidBuy registration form refers to CPO Notice 2025.04. This notice requires that requesting users have completed the diversity and inclusion in procurement training prior to gaining access to BidBuy. You can access the online on-demand training through CPO Notice 2025.04. Additionally, we have our Procurement Training Academy. We offer 4 courses that are approved by UPPCC for contact hours. Registration for these is required. Please visit our training center for upcoming training dates. And I want to highlight again that July 10th, we have Procurement Methods Small Purchase, and July 17th, we have Procurement Methods IFB, but only register for that one if you have a specifications course certificate. Now let's take a look at today's Tuesday takeaway. All right, so this is a fast fact. So German chocolate cake was invented in Texas. The cake was named after Samuel German, who in 1852 created the formula for a mild dark baking chocolate for Baker's Chocolate Company. In 1957, a recipe for German's chocolate cake appeared as the recipe of the day in the Dallas Morning News. It was created by Mrs. George Clay, a homemaker from Dallas, Texas, and used the Germans' sweet chocolate, baking chocolate, introduced over a century earlier in 1852 by American baker Samuel German for the Baker's Chocolate Company of Boston, Massachusetts. And I'll be honest in saying that I was today years old when I learned this. I always thought that the cake had originated in Germany. Okay, so have a great day, everyone. And if you have any questions, please send those over to the cpogs.training@illinois.gov email account. We'll see you next week.